Your ego will travel with you on this earth and be your companion for worser or worse.
It pretends it's your friend, your bestest amigo, and it pours on the guilt.
That's the mark of the ego.
It's there to protect you, to help you be strong. So it has to remind you you've done it all wrong.
You're weak and you're lazy and you don't have a clue.
That's your drill sergeant ego trying to motivate you.
The ego wants you to be all you can be, so it gives you these pep talks all day and for free.
Oh, the places you'll go.
And the guilt trips you'll travel as your ego plays judge and bangs on its gavel.
But you always can get some relief from your shame.
By projecting it onto the others you'll blame.
For that is the ego at its beastiest best. It nurses its grievances close to its chest.
Republicans.
Liberals.
Your parents.
Your ex.
The world is just teeming with folks to correct.
If only these fools would conform to your ways, you could get on with life without further delays.
The ego's always finding new gripes to complain about.
Turns molehills to mountains of yikes to feel pain about.
Sometimes the ego stuff gets stuffy, and you come down with a coat or an ouchie or roughy.
But there's no time for rest, so get up out of bed. If you're just here and now, you won't get ahead.
Your to-do list must buzz like bees when they're busying, filling your days till they're endlessly dizzying.
Oh, the places you'll go and the people you'll see.
All through the lenses of what's in it for me.
Because the ego believes there is something it lacks, and until it's found, it won't let you relax.
Perhaps you'll find it in the next one you date.
True love at first sight with the soul kind of mate.
The romance is hot till the climate turns cold.
Because when two halves collide, they do not make a whole.
It's great till the love gets obscured by control.
For when two halves collide, they cannot make a whole.
So the ego moves on, ever constantly striving, addicted to seeking, afraid of arriving.
You're traveling fast at the speed of surviving, with fear in the driver's seat doing the driving.
Or maybe you are on the fast track of success.
You're constantly driven to be great, better, best.
You're a mover and a shaker, a real-time achiever.
You're a real self-made man.
Or a dazzling diva.
You're rich and you're famous and you make quite a splash.
You're on top of the world and you're rolling in cash.
You drive the right car.
You married the right spouse.
Today, lunch with Oprah.
Tomorrow, the White House.
But at night, insecurity pays you a call because you know at any moment you could lose it all.
Your shrink says to rest.
Your spouse sure agrees.
Your doctor says ulcers.
Take 14 of these.
You know you should slow it down sooner or later, but your foot is just glued to the accelerator.
Your ego consoles.
Well, at least you're successful, and it's a sign of success to be constantly stressful.
You've made it to prime time and everyone loves you.
But your self-esteem's based on what others think of you.
And opinions can change in the blink of an eye.
Which is why you need meds just to sleep and get by.
One day when you've failed and succeeded enough, you'll witness your ego exposed in the buff.
And you realize behind all its protective clothing that the ego is simply a state of self-loathing.
And beyond that, you realize the biggest of deals.
You've dreamt up the ego.
It's not even real.
So for richer or poorer,
In all kinds of health,
you make a commitment to love yourself.
You release the projections you placed upon others and find through forgiveness that peace is discovered.
You realize the love that you search for outside you is what you are made of and can't be denied you.
So you let go of your worries, your plans, and your pills. Put some logs on the fire and learn how to chill.
Your old superstitions have gone up in smoke.
like you can't rest in peace until after you croak,
You no longer feel death, or for that matter, life.
'cause you know that all matters are safe and all right.
While resting in peace, you will soon be inspired to go out in the world with some newfound desires.
Desires that spring from your heart and your soul, and wherever they take you, you go in there whole.
For the ego is now in the passenger seat. It lets down the window and takes in the treats.
There's no need to hurry. You're
'Cause
taking it slow.
Because
the journey's as rich as the places you'll go.
Where you're going, you don't need to know.
'Cause the journey's as rich as the places you'll go. The journey's as rich as the places you'll go. Thank you guys so much. That, of course, was an adaptation of Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go, but most people know it was created by Scott Kallichstein Grace, a wonderful composer of music, a minister in the New Thought movement in California. And in the terms of Levitt, we pooched it from him and adapted it for you this morning, because we're talking about the ego. If you have studied the ego in a context of being a psychologist or a mental health worker or a doctor or a social therapist of some kind, however you may have studied it, I'm going to ask you to sort of suspend whatever definitions you may have, because we're speaking of the ego today in metaphysical and spiritual terms, and it might be different for you. There are many ways to describe the ego, so I'm talking about it from that particular perspective. Now, I just want you to know that today's kind of one of those days that if you're the kind of person that likes to think about all these deep theological things, you'll probably be pretty happy, because there's some of that in here today. There's also, for many people, something that people have been asking me for a long time, and that is a recipe for enlightenment. People say, oh, it's all great, but how do you do it? How do you do it? Well, today, if you'll just hang in with me, the golden nugget at the end of today is an absolute formula for how to do it. I didn't make it up, but I'm happy to share it with you today. You will walk away with that, if nothing else. We're going to talk about the ego. Now, the ego is part of a way we're thinking of the separation of life. Ever since that moment we were born and we began to experience the world through our perceptions, we began to think that we were separated not only from each other and from life, but from God as well, too. It's the one thing the ego really does. Is anything, it's about that perception, and it's an illusion because it's not real. The truth resides in the God part of our consciousness, and it is existing in all people. That's what I said in the beginning of our service today. Remember that you were created in that image and likeness of God. There is a piece of us that is that God consciousness. In that part resides the knowledge and the truth. True knowledge with a capital K, the knowing that's deep inside of you, not facts, not research, not scientifically validated anything. It's the knowing inside of you that God is real and God is alive and God is in you and God is in all things. That kind of knowing is there. The truth lives in you. The truth about when you give love, you receive love. The truth about all the spiritual principles that we have been studying here. It's a capital T truth. Again, not facts, not scientific teachings, but spiritual truth. Those are the God parts of you, and they are in you already. We're always teaching here that everything you ever need to know is already in you. Our job here on Sunday morning is partly to just remind you and me, and to help us wake up to those truths. Now, the ego part is all perception, things that we think are real, and perception changes. You may remember several Sundays ago I showed you some optical illusions, and depending upon how you shift your vision, the picture changed. All of our life is that way. Every situation in our life depends upon our particular perception, and that changes in relationship to our own spiritual evolution. In 1987, I started coming to this church for the very first time. It was very strange. Some of you may can relate. Some people come to this church and go, oh, the first time I came in, I knew I was home, and I cried, and I've been crying for 6 months, and I just love it. That was not me. I came, I sat right back there where James is, in the very back last pew, and it was okay, but I thought everyone was a little weird. They laughed and they clapped. I came to a class taught by the minister at that time, David McClure. Some of you may remember David McClure. The class was on the Course in Miracles. And he was standing up in front of the class and he was telling us that all of life and everything was an illusion. I was not ready. Some of you may not be ready today. It's okay. I stood up in the back, and I was every preacher's nightmare. I said, do you mean to tell me that this pew is not real? And if I was to come up there and punch you in the face, you wouldn't feel it? Rah, 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 rah. I was so concerned with defending my own thought structure and my own belief system. I was completely obnoxious, and to his great credit as a minister, he didn't react, he didn't respond, he just loved me through it, and now look at me. You never know what kind of mess you're going to create, right? So if you're a skeptic in the back of the pew and you're ready to pound on it and say, it's not an illusion, just be careful. You never know where you might end up. So that's kind of what it's part of when we're aware for the right teaching it comes. But that's what happens with that. So God is one-mindedness, and that's where the Spirit of God resides. Now, here's the difficult part for a lot of us to understand is we are so attached to our ego. I believe absolutely that God understands we are not going to reach enlightenment by trying to get rid of the ego. Not possible. For most of us, at some point, it is the end point. When we reach absolute enlightenment, yes, it'll be gone. But in the journey, it is not possible. So what happens is, it's like God uses the ego and parts of the ego to move us through the spiritual journey. You see, the ego makes the decisions many times. It's the place where decisions. You made a decision to come here this morning. You see, so I think that was a good decision. That's what we would call a right-minded decision. You may not have known why you did it, and you may be questioning it severely in this moment, but you made that decision, and that was part of your ego making that decision. The ego does that. There is a right-mindedness to ego, and then there's a wrong-mindedness to ego. The right-mindedness will respond out of love and out of a desire for a closeness to God, and the wrong-mindedness will always decide out of fear and out of judgment and out of a lack of forgiveness. So those are all part of the ego. That's all part and parcel of who we are. So the trick for us is to live in right-mindedness as we make the journey. And sooner or later, as we keep making all the right decisions, using our ego to move through the right decision place, we finally end up in a place of enlightenment where the ego begins to slip away. But it doesn't slip away because we want it to. It slips away because we get closer and closer to the truth, to the one. And then the duality falls apart. The ego's one powerful, fearful belief is that we are separated from God. It's the one thing we teach fundamentally that is so untrue here. Where could you possibly be that God is not? You are a part and parcel of God. How could you be separated from God? We just don't teach that. It is not possible. And so it is the ego's thing to say, oh, yeah, well, it isn't because look at what all's happened to me and look at all these things. That's the ego's job, is to teach separation. Charles Fillmore is the co-founder of Unity, and he said the personal self is the ego around which revolve all thoughts that bind us to error. So there's error thinking, and then there's right thinking. And so our job is to keep communication with the Holy Spirit, with the Spirit of God, to make the right decisions. This is not a uniquely unity concept. All across religions around the world, there is a knowing of our inherent divinity and oneness with God, and we see it in scriptures all over. This is from the Shinto religion. If we keep unperverted the human heart, which is like unto heaven and received from earth, that is God. If we can create that unperverted heart, unperverted meaning single-minded in God, it is God. This is from Buddhism. Every being has the Buddha nature. This is the self, the real self of who we are. Hinduism says that which is the finest essence. This whole world has that as its soul. That is reality. That is the self. That art thou. What a great message to be giving in a religion. You are the absolute finest essence of the world. If we know that, as we begin to focus on it, it will become more manifest in our life. I love this one. It's from the African religion, and it shows that even in traditional, indigenous religions, this truth exists. Father, almighty force, that force which is in everything, come down between us. Fill us until we become like thee, until we become like thee. What a beautiful prayer. In the Muslim religion, it says, I have breathed into man of my spirit. So you might say, okay, fine, I get it. That's who we are. And I get it that we're making decisions that either bring us closer to that or not. But how do you do it? How do we live in right-mindedness? Many of you are familiar with a man named Gary Renard, who wrote a book called The Disappearance of the Universe and many other wonderful books. He was here for a whole day seminar once. In reading his book, he gives a recipe, a very simple 3-step recipe. Now, this is not the final recipe. I'm going to give you the final, but this was the one that started me on this creation. And his recipe is this: meditation. I'm sure you're completely surprised about that. Advanced forgiveness and guidance from the Holy Spirit. Now, here's the part I do want to encourage you to get planted in your mind. He teaches about meditation, and he says meditate 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. That's where we start. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. It's not a lot. If you want to really consciously progress on the spiritual journey, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. He talks about advanced forgiveness. He does not use that word forgiveness in the traditional way that we sort of think of forgiveness. Somebody done me wrong, so I'm a good person, I forgive them, and we move on. It's not about that. He uses forgiveness as a way of actually shifting our perception from a wrong-mindedness into right-mindedness. And right-mindedness tells us that God created the entire world and it is always perfect just as it is. And if it is always perfect just as it is, then there can be no one ever against us. There can be no threatening to us and who we genuinely are in any way, shape, or form. So if someone has hurt or offended me, there is absolutely nothing for me to forgive, but I forgive the illusion of it. I forgive myself in a sense of actually even thinking it was possible, and I see the truth of who you are. It's about shifting perception. And in that kind of forgiveness, which is sometimes called radical forgiveness, sometimes called total forgiveness, it has nothing to do with the event or the person. It's about my perception of separation. And when I forgive that, the world changes, and I see us as one. And when I see us as one, there's nothing but love, and that is healing. And the last is guidance from the Holy Spirit. In the last years I've been here, I've been teaching a couple of prayers. First one, you might remember, is God, make your presence known to me throughout this day. I've been teaching that since the first 6 months I was here. It's a very simple mantra kind of prayer you can make throughout the day. At the end of your 5 minutes, God, make your presence known to me throughout this day. It's just an invitation for God to remind us. The other one that Gary Renard talks about is Holy Spirit, guide me now. Holy Spirit, guide me now. Very simple. You could just say, Spirit, guide me now. Whatever it is, the point is, don't trust your thoughts. Don't trust them. The ego thoughts, don't trust them. There are God thoughts that we can trust. Those thoughts we can trust. And how do we know? We invite those thoughts to be foremost in our mind. Spirit, guide me now is an inviting, an invitation to that presence. Roy Eugene Davis was here about 3 years ago in our church. He's a fellow that I just recently discovered was a disciple and a student of Paramahansa Yogananda, who was the great guru who brought Kriya Yoga teachings, many of the Hindu teachings, here to America, and has a big center in Southern California, the Self-Realization Fellowship. Several centers, actually. Roy Eugene Davis went to the East Coast and started his own center. He's still alive and still publishing and still teaching. He was here about 3 years ago. I was listening to a DVD of his, and he recalls his very first encounter with Paramahansa Yogananda. The very first time he met him, he was given a recipe for enlightenment. And I wanted to share that with you.
I remember the first thing he said to me when we had our first private talk, when I first met him. Just before he dismissed me, his advice for living there and entered into the program. He said, read a little and meditate more and think of God all the time. But I remember the next night when I was talking to Master, and just before my time with him ended, he got quiet. Then he said, don't bother yourself with what others do or don't do. And he said, don't look back. He said, look straight ahead and go all the way in this incarnation. And I knew what he meant by that because I heard him talk before, you know, liberation, God realization. And then he said, and you can.
There's a commonality in theme there that I want to share with you, because I took these two different little dialogues and I put them together into this is your formula. This is the recipe, okay? I'm going to invite you to try it for at least 21 days, because it takes that long to really change a habit and to really change direction in your life. Read a little, not a lot. Meditate more, and think about God all the time. I put them together in a two-part plan. Morning and evening is when you read a little and you meditate 5 minutes. Okay, don't read heavy, weird stuff that you're going to get. I mean, and I'm talking about reading spiritual material. You know, you know what I'm talking about. Read those things. You got the Bible, you got your 24-hour book, you've got all kinds of devotional books. The world is full of great things. Read a little bit, meditate 5 minutes in the evening, and do the same thing in the morning. It's a very simple little plan, okay? That's part one. Part two, during the day, practice total forgiveness. That's that absolute forgiveness. That is that forgiveness that doesn't look at the past, as Yogananda said. Don't worry about what other people have done, what other people have said. This is part of what Gary Bernard is talking about, destroying that illusion of being separate, knowing it's all whole and perfect the way it is. And then the last one is to think about God all the time. Now, that's the hard one. You say, yeah, well, I can do that for about like 30 seconds, and then I get distracted. Well, that happens to everybody. So it's like a little pearl, and you string a little pearl there. And then when you remember, you string another pearl, and then you string another, and maybe the first 10 days you have a pretty skimpy-looking necklace. But then when we fall down. We just get up, and we do it again. It's not about beating ourselves up. It's not about feeling bad. We will fall down, so we get up, and we do it again. That's what he says. Keep on doing it, because you can. I really believe you can. So it's very simple. Morning and evening, read a little and meditate, 5 minutes. Throughout the day, practice forgiveness in every moment, and think about God all the time. If we do that, we will transcend the ego and become the beings we were created to be. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes with me for just a moment, please. It's been a lot to think about, but it is a definite plan. There are many plans. There are many ways up the mountain. I believe this simple one can get us started in a very easy and beautiful way. In these moments that we have together now in a quiet time of meditation, I invite you just to check in and see if this fits for you. If it's your time to do this. If it's for you to make the simple commitment. If it's right for you now. As we spend time together in the sacred and holy silence.